Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Online. This week we're going to be taking a look into Standard with a Paradox Storm deck. So, this one's kind of a offshoot of the previous Storm deck, except for this one is almost entirely rotation proof. The only thing that's actually going to rotate out with the new set is going to be Hedron Archive, so we just really need to find ourselves a different mana rock, and I'm sure there will be something that pops up. It's not the end of the world if Hedron Archive disappears, but it will be a little bit upsetting, let's just say. So, the basic idea of the deck, the namesake of the card, is built around Paradox Engine. It says, 5 mana, legendary artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. As you may notice, a lot of our non-land permanents are actually mana rocks as well. So, the basic idea of the deck is that we'll play a Paradox Engine down, and then we'll play down any spell that we can afford, and it's going to untap all of our non-land permanents, which includes our Manoliths, our Hedron Archives, our Pyramids of the Pantheons. All of these generate mana. So, as they generate mana, we can then spend that mana to play more mana generating spells, which allows us to do more stuff. And then we refill our hand with Reverse Engineer, which has Improvise, which means we tap our artifacts in order to pay for it, draw 3 cards, trigger the Paradox Engine, untap everything again. And we'll keep doing this as much as possible to generate as much mana as possible. And the way that we're going to win is by Cut to Ribbons. It's a little easier if I do that for you guys. So, Cut to Ribbons is a double-sided card. Cut says 1 and red, sorcery speed. Cut deals 4 damage to target creature. So, on its face, it's just creature removal, but the win condition is actually ribbons for us. Double black and X, Aftermath, so we cast this from our graveyard. Each opponent loses X life. So, as I mentioned, we're generating a ton of mana, and then we'll spend all of that mana on ribbons, point it at our opponent, and our opponent will lose 20 plus life in a single turn. That's the idea of the deck. If we go right to the very beginning of the deck as well, we've got Implement of Improvement. So 1 colourless mana for an artifact that says pay white, sacrifice the Implement of Improvement, you gain 2 life. So this gives us a little bit of resiliency, allows us to hang in there. We might not be running white lands, but we are running Ether Hubs, which can pay for white. We're running Pyramid of the Pantheons that can generate white, and Prophetic Prisms that can filter any of our mana into white mana as well. So it is actually quite easy to pay that white mana. And when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, i.e. we use its first ability, we get to draw a card. So we actually, if we draw into the Implement of Improvement with a Paradox Engine, then we'll untap, we'll generate mana. If we've run out of cards to cast, then we'll sack an Implement, which allows us to get a redraw, and hopefully that card on top is going to be something that we can cast. That is obviously a concern for the deck. Running out of cards to cast will mean that our combo ends. So we've got things like Oracle's Vault. And we're only running 1 copy of this because we only really need 1 copy. 4 mana for an artifact. It says pay 2 and tap it. Exile the top card of your library. Until the end of the turn you may play that card. Put a brick counter on Oracle's Vault. So when we play that card, Paradox Engine untaps it as well. So we can replay that. So we can actually go through our entire deck with Oracle's Vault, and then we can play all those cards. If we've generated enough brick counters on Oracle's Vault, then we can use the secondary ability as well. It says, exile the top card of your library. Until end of the turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost, and you can only do this if you've got 3 brick counters. So after we've done the Oracle's Vault first ability 3 times, Oracle's Vault officially taps and gives us a free card. And if we cast that card for free, it untaps the Oracle's Vault so we can cast it again. And you might be saying, why have we only got 1 of that? That seems badass. It's because we've actually got Whir of Invention as well. So we've got a virtual 2 of them. We don't actually need Oracle's Vault in order to win. It's just really helpful and almost certainly seals the deal most of the time if you can get that secondary ability online. But Whir of Invention is 3 blue and an X, instant speed with Improvise, so we can tap our artifacts, which includes tapping our Prophetic Prisms, which don't generate mana, but with a Paradox Engine in play, they generate colourless mana if we cast spells, essentially, with Improvise. It says, search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this can find our Paradox Engine. We're only running 3 copies because we only need 1 to resolve and stick. and the Whir of Invention is a virtual for Paradox Engines, as it were. And then our Oracle Vault is the main target for the Whir of Invention as well. Try not to go find the Mana Rocks unless you really need to find them, because Whir of Invention can be quite useful in getting you win conditions. Moving on, we've got Pyramid of the Pantheon. It's very similar to Oracle's Vault, except for it's actually a mana generating pyramid. So 1 colourless mana, says pay 2, tap it, put 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool, and then put a brick counter on Pyramid. And then if it's got 3 or more brick counters, it instead turns into a 3 mana generating 1 mana cost card. So as you might be able to imagine, we want to be getting this to 3 counters. Once we got it to 3 counters, every single time it untaps, it generates 3 mana from the Paradox Engine. So we want to be able to get as many of those on the board as possible. Try not to be too reliant on these in the second and third games, because your opponents could bring in things like a Braid, artifact destruction essentially, which means you're actually investing in an artifact that might just get destroyed later down the line, so just be a little bit careful about that. We then have Renegade maps as well. So Renegade maps are 1 colourless artifacts that enter the battlefield tapped. We then tap them, and we get to search our library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. Shuffle our library. I should mention we sacrifice it as well. So we get to go grab our basics. We're only running 2 colours, and you might be thinking, why not run any swamps? It's because of the general amount of mana rocks and filtering. We really don't need black mana in here to get the ribbons mana. We also do have our ether hubs as well, so we're only ever going to be using ribbons once. Most likely during this during any game, so we only need to be able to make 2 black mana, and with manoliths and prophetic prisms and ether hubs, it's not going to be difficult in the slightest to be able to do that. So Renegade map grabs us our basics, thins out our deck, and makes sure that later down the line when we're comboing off with Oracle's Vault, we're drawing less basics out of our deck. Later down the line as well, when we don't need the basics, we can actually just use these as improvised targets as well. So Reverse Engineer, for example, can tap the Renegade map to generate mana. So it can be a tap land in itself later down the line. We then have Glintness Cranes, 4 copies of this. So for 2 and a blue, 1/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them, put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. You might get the idea that it's about to hit every single time. And what this is essentially going to be doing is grabbing our mana rocks in the early game, or our win conditions later down the line, if that should be the case. If we have our mana rocks in hand, then Glintness Crane wants to go find Paradox Engines and things like that. So we want to go find all of our artifacts, and we could be grabbing things like Prophetic Prism as well, so you get extra draws. 2 mana, artifact, enters the battlefield, draws you a card. So it's a redrawing artifact. Works really well with the Paradox Engine, because you cast this, you get a redraw of whatever's on top, and then you cast whatever you drew into as well, which untaps yet again. So you can really chain together a lot of good stuff with Prophetic Prism. We then have 2 copies of Supreme Will. 2 and a blue for an instant speed modular card. It says, choose 1, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. So first ability, really good if we're in game 1 against control. We at least get some say over what resolves, essentially. So we could hold up a Supreme Will when we're trying to go for our Paradox Engine, for example, if that's something we want to do. And that's just going to make sure that at least something sticks, because as long as our Paradox Engine sticks, then we can do a lot of fun stuff, because it's when you cast spells that it untaps everything. So the card that we cast with Paradox Engine doesn't even have to resolve for its effect to take to the board as well, which is really good. Its secondary ability, though, yet again, like the Glintness Crane, allows us to go find whatever we need. It allows us to find non-artifact based stuff, so it could help us go find our cut to ribbons, for example. Maybe we want some card draw, maybe we find the Whir of Invention so we can then go find whatever we need, or it could simply be a land as well to just make sure that we hit our drops on time. But the likelihood is if we're on 3 mana, then we've got manoliths and things like that available to us, so shouldn't be too much of an issue in that regard. Speaking of manoliths, it is simply a 3 mana mana rock, adds 1 mana of any colour to our mana pool, and obviously we can untap it with Paradox Engine later down the line as well. So nice lot of ramp with our artifacts. We then have Hedron Archive, 4 mana artifact, generates 2 mana. Colourless mana, to be specific. And then it's also got a secondary ability as well. If we are about to start whiffing with our Paradox Engine chain, then we can actually sack Hedron Archives to draw 2 cards. It's going to be sad to see the Hedron Archive go. I do hope that there is a mana rock to replace this, but at least we've got some time to play around with it until then. It's just so good right now to not include. So yeah, we can draw 2 cards, which allows us to find extra stuff to keep that Paradox Engine chain going, and hopefully the Oracle's Vault as well can keep going on that sense as well. So that's essentially the main deck, guys. If you really do want to see what the deck does in action, I recommend checking out the matches. Match 1 should be out already, and then I'll be doing daily content with the Paradox Storm deck. So tomorrow will be another match, and the day after there'll be another match as well, because you guys said that you wanted daily footage, so I'm going to stick to that. On to the sideboard anyway, before we kick all that one out. So we are effectively a Grixis deck. As our main board is, we have Grixis colours pretty much scattered throughout. So for the most part, we are a Grixis deck, but technically we can be 5 colour. So I've tried to just stick to the Grixis stuff though, just to make sure that there's no hiccups here and there. But there might be some colours cards from any of the other colours, green or white, for example, we might want to include in here. Not entirely sure. This isn't a final version of the sideboard. Anyway, on to the blue cards. We've got essentially our control package right here. We've got Dispels for counter spells, 1 blue mana, counter target instant spell. Negates for, yet again, counter spells, but also for planeswalkers and cast outs and things like that. So that's a 2 mana counter spell. And then we've got Metallic Rebuke as well, which is our almost pseudo hard counter, as it were. 2 and a blue, instant speed, counter target spell unless controller pays 3. So it's effectively some more Supreme Wills in that sense. However, it does have improvise, so we can counter our opponent's stuff for as little as 1 blue mana, which is why we're including these over another copy of Supreme Will for the time being. We then have Bontu's Last Reckoning. So Bontu's Last Reckoning seems really sweet in this deck. It's 1 and 2 black, sorcery speed, destroy all creatures and lands you control, don't untap during your next untap step. So the downside to Bontu's Last Reckoning is that any mana we spend, any lands we use to spend to cast it, don't untap. Well, this deck is entirely revolving around mana rocks. So the way I see it, we're going to be using 3 mana lists to cast our Bontu's Last Reckoning. So that secondary downside to the board wipe is actually not really going to come into effect all that often. So it is essentially a 3 mana board wipe for us, which has no downside for the most part. We then have 2 copies of Magma Spray against the aggressive decks. There's a lot of 2 toughness creatures that we want to be getting rid of with Magma Spray. If we're against zombies, then we've got our Crypt Breakers and what are they called now? The 2 ones that can come back from the graveyard. Those are the answers to those. 1 red mana, instant speed, 2 damage to that creature, and if it would die, it gets exiled instead. We then have 2 copies of a Braid. So for 1 and a red, instant speed, we've got a modular card again. It allows us to either deal 3 damage to target creature, so we bring this in against creature-based matchups, or we bring it in against Godpharaoh's Gift kind of matchups as well. We destroy the artifact for 2 mana, that kind of thing. We then have Crook of Condemnation. Crook of Condemnation speaks for itself for the most part. It is here for graveyard-based matchups. Yet again, for the Godpharaoh's Gift, we'll probably bring in both of these so that we can destroy the Godpharaoh's Gift with a Braid, but also the Crook to exile anything out of their board. So if they use Refurbishes to get them back, for example, we can exile their entire graveyard to stop them from being able to do that, or exile all the threats if they do actually already have a Godpharaoh's Gift on the board, so it does nothing effectively. Finally, we've got a copy of Commit to Memory. Commit to Memory is 3 and a blue, instant speed. It is a counter spell. Allows us to put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top. So that might be all we need to go and do our combo, just essentially slow our opponent down enough. Or we could also use the memory side of it to refill our hand if it comes to it, if we are maybe whiffing a little bit on our Paradox Engine Oracle's Vault combo. Then we might want to refill our hand and go for it again. Another use for the commit to memory, though, is the commit side of it can be used to get rid of Amonkhet Gideon. Because Amonkhet Gideon, if he gets his emblem, it means that he actually can't lose to Cut to Ribbons, because each opponent loses X life, can't target Planeswalkers, so we would need to have an answer to the Gideon. So we can effectively go through our entire deck with Oracle's Vault and all of our card draw. There comes a point in this deck where it's almost impossible to not hit something that makes an untap with the Paradox engine. So as long as we can get that done and we have a single copy of Commit to Memory in our deck, we can Cut to Ribbons our opponent to minus numbers and then just go hunting for the Commit to Memory. And if Gideon ever gets removed from the battlefield or dies in any kind of way, then Commit to Memory will win us the game on the spot. Anyway, guys, that is going to do it for this deck tech. If you do enjoy the look of the deck and you want to see it in action, I do advise it. It is very interesting to watch. Then be sure to check out the matches that shall be following shortly after. Alright, guys, do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.